Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of making Lola's Mr. Sparkle costume. In part 1 we made the corset and fitted the bodice part of the dress over the top of the corset. In this part we're going to be making the skirt, attaching it to the bodice and hemming the skirt. So the outside of the skirt is going to be our Mr. Sparkle fabric. Then for the lining I found this pink sequin fabric in my stash that goes with it beautifully. So we thought, as well as all the rhinestones on the outside, we thought we'd add some sparkle to the inside of the skirt as well, which you'll see because it's got a really high split. You'll see the sparkles on the inside. So before I attach the Mr. Sparkle layer to the corset, I drew around the bottom of it so I could get the shape that we need for the top of the skirt panels. So this is our front panel and this is where it curves up to the split. We've got the side front and then the side backs. So I can now cut these up and then I can use these to get the shape I need at the top of each skirt panel. So on my pattern piece that I've made from drawing around the bottom of the bodice, I've drawn a line all the way across and that will give me a line approximately to measure down from, instead of trying to work it out from up here, so I can measure the length I need from here. And I've also added a 1/2 inch seam allowance above the line there. So I've cut the pattern pieces out just roughly, then I can lay them onto my pattern fabric and draw the size of the panels that I need. So I've got my side front left, my front, my right front, and then because the back was only the little bit of fabric we've got and we need to extend it all the way across the back, so what I've done is worked out what the measurement that I needed from side seam to side seam across underneath Lola's bum. I've divided that in quarters, so then I've got 4 equal pieces across the back there. So I've extended this line here is where the fabric stops, so I've extended it and then made a matching one that will be the back. I'm doing that many panels because I want to cut them so that they flare out to give us a nice shape at the bottom of the skirt. If I just did 2 pieces at the back, we just wouldn't get that fullness that we want at the hem. Okay, the first pattern piece I'm going to make is my front piece. So this is where my split is. So I've just put that on the edge parallel there and I've added her 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I need to add my 1/2 inch seam allowance the other side as well. So now I'm going to measure down this edge. Now I measured on Lola and we need this, I need to cut this to 37.5, so I'm going to mark that down the front. So I've made a mark along here at the 37.5. I can't fit everything in the camera, sorry. Now that's the centre front split, so that needs to be straight, but then because we want to have this flare at the hem into sort of triangles, I'm now going to, from here, just sort of curve this part out. I'm trying to work out how much full, we want it full but not crazy big and full, so I reckon probably that angle looks about right. And I can use this piece to match the angles on the other pieces. So I've drawn that line all the way down there. And now, this line I drew that was sort of approximately level across the whole thing, I'm now going to measure down from that. So to my mark I just made, which is about 33.5 below that. So I'm now going to measure 33.5 down from there, and that will give me a nice, hopefully straight hem. Even though the top's at an angle, having this line here means I can measure down from there and hopefully cut a good hem length. That's my first pattern piece drawn on here. If I move, hang on, let me move down here. I need an overhead setup so I can show you everything at once when I've got big pieces like this. So from the edge of the fabric at the hem, the width of my panel is about 18 inches, and that should give us the fullness we need at the front. I might cut the back panels a little fuller as well. So I'm going to repeat this process for all of my pattern pieces. So I'm going to pin them on, draw the extra seam allowance I need at the sides, and then mark my sides and my hem length for all of them. And then I'll pin them together and put them onto the top half of the dress and see how they look. I've cut all my pattern pieces and I've pinned them just roughly together and pinned them onto the dress just to make sure that I did get the top part right and it is sitting correctly, and it is. I've worked out the fullness I can do. I've only got so much fabric for the Mr. Sparkle and for the sequins, so I've worked out the fullness I can do to fit on the fabric, and I've also checked the pieces on the fabric to make sure that they are going to fit, and they do, which is good. So you can see we've got the split here, and then we've got our front and side front, and the side front's just slightly fuller than this side front seam here. And then because the back just goes straight across, I've just cut one piece. So this piece will then be repeated 4 times, which is going to give us lots of fullness at the back. And when we hem it, we're actually going to cut it with just a slight train at the back as well. So now that I know that I'm happy with the shape, now that I know that the pattern pieces fit onto the bottom of the dress, I'm going to go ahead and cut out all my Mr. Sparkle pieces, all of my lining and sequin fabric pieces, stitch them together and press them open. So I'll end up with 2 skirts. And like the top half of the dress, I've got to be really careful that I cut these the correct way round because the front's not symmetrical. And added pressure is that I've got no spare fabric if I get it wrong, so I have to double check this as I cut. So I've got the outside layer of my skirt cut and pinned together, and I've got the sequin lining layer of my skirt cut and pinned together. And I've just had a thought that the bit that's going to be gathered under Lola's bum, because it's going to be sequin fabric on the inside, might be a little bit itchy. So I'm actually going to replace the top few inches of each of the back panels with the Mr. Sparkle fabric. So I'm just going to unpin these at the top. Then I'm going to cut, so for each of these panels, I'm just going to cut across it and cut a few inches off. Then I'll use that piece to cut a piece of Mr. Sparkle fabric exactly the same. And I'll add 1 inch on, which will give me the seam allowance I need to sew it back together. So cutting that extra inch on the bottom gives me a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to sew these on and press them open, and then I'm going to sew all of the seams of the outside fabric and the lining fabric and then press them open as well. Now my outside pieces are sewn together and pressed open, I'm going to pin them right side together onto the top part of the dress. And at the centre front split, I've just folded back my 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top. Once I've pinned all the way around, I'm going to stitch it on, and I've left a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now the outside layer of the skirt is stitched onto the bottom of the bodice of the dress, I'm going to put the lining on. So again, I'm pinning it right sides together. So this is where the split is, lining up with the split on the outside. And this time when I come off the edge of the dress, so this is the open back part, I'm just going to keep stitching, and I'm going to stitch the lining and the outside of the skirt fabric right sides together to finish those top edges. So I've got both layers stitched on right sides together onto the bodice, and I've just clipped my curve. So now I can turn it in the right way, and we can add the elastic across the back. To put the elastic through the back underneath Lola's bum, I've just stitched a line of stitching through all of the layers at the top of the skirt there where the opening is, and I've stitched it just wider than my elastic. And now I've measured the length of elastic that we need, and I've cut an extra inch at each end. So I'm going to go up through the open hem, thread it through this little channel that I've just created, and stitch it at each end. And I know there's an inch of elastic past each end to get the gathering just right. And I'm just going to use a big safety pin to thread it through with. To cut the hem, I've put my dress on the mannequin and I've stood it on my desk. So This is one of the joys of my new studio, is that I've got a tall ceiling and I've also got a desk that I can do things like this on, which I didn't have before in my old studio. So I've measured on Lola where we need the hem to be at the front, and I've put a pin there. I've also set up a laser level, which means I can use that to cut a perfectly straight hem. So as long as my dress is sat nice and level on the mannequin, I can use the laser to then cut along my 1/2 inch seam allowance. So all I've done is I've been around and I've pinned both layers of the hem together. You can see the weight of the sequin fabric has made it drop quite a lot. And now I've got all this lined up, all I need to do is cut along where the laser level hits the fabric, and I should get a really straight hem. Now I'm only doing this for the front and side front because I want it to be a little bit longer. We want just a little train at the back. So you have to let it hang as straight as you can. As soon as you move it out, you can see that the line moves down the fabric, so it's going to be too long. So you need to keep it hanging as straight as you possibly can to get it cut nice and straight with that laser level line. So to pin and sew the hem, I'm going to turn everything inside out through the opening at the top of the split. So all I'm going to do is put my hand inside, and I'm going to start by grabbing the bottom corner at the bottom of the split, and I'm going to pull that up through the gap here. And then once I've got it through, I'm going to take that pin at the corner out and turn it so it's right sides together. And then I'm going to pin along the hem and as far up the split as I can. I will have to do a little bit of hand sewing at the very top of the split because I won't be able to get close enough to it under the machine. So then at the next seam on the hem, I'm going to do the same. Just take the pin out and flip it right sides together. And pin it back together, lining my seams up. And then I can pin all the way along where I've cut it here. So that's the first panel of the hem, and then round the corner is up my split, so I'm going to pin as far up there as I can as well. And I'm going to do this around the entire hem and then up the split on the other side, and then I'm going to sew the whole thing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Sometimes if there's a lot of fabric, you might want to do this in 2 parts. I think because there's so much hem going on and because the sequins are quite thick, I'm going to do the first few panels and then put it back through and then pull the next part out and do that. I think that way it's just going to be easier to handle. For smaller hems or for much thinner fabric, you can do it all in one. This is how the hem looks turned back in the right way, and I've just given it a really good press. I just use a piece of silk organza between the sequins and my iron to stop the sequins melting. Because it's cotton, it's pressed really beautifully, so it's got a really nice crisp finish. I couldn't quite get the top of the split under my sewing machine because of the corset underneath it, so I've just hand sewn the top of that together, and I've just done a little bit of hand stitching there just to hold it all in place. And we're actually going to make a big yellow bow to go there, so you won't see that hand stitching. I've also added a little bit of padding in the hips, and I've just used a bit of wadding, which isn't an ideal solution, but Lola has to wear this dress in a few days and needs to take it and rhinestone it, and that's all I've got here. So for the event she's wearing it for, it'll be fine, but we'll change that later. We've also added a yellow ribbon in the back. So the last job I need to do is make the bow, and then Lola can take it and do all the rhinestoning on it. While Lola's rhinestoning it over the next couple of days, I'm going to make all of the accessories to go with it. I'm making gloves, a necklace, a G-string and a headpiece. And I'll be back to show you how I make the big bubbly headpiece to go with it, and then we'll be back to show you the finished look all together. I'm not going to show you the finished dress today. I'm going to wait till it's all rhinestoned and show you together with all of the accessories. So see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.